The warm spit slid down my cheek like a tear of hatred and dripped onto the navy blue dress my late husband always said made my eyes sparkle like sapphires. For a second, I tasted the salt of humiliation mixed with her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance Robert gave me every anniversary. The irony hit me like a punch. My husband's killer was humiliating me while wearing the perfume he used to choose for me. Sophia stood beside me, stunning in her $50,000 wedding gown, with that venomous smile I'd learned to recognize over the past 6 months. Her blue eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. Around us, the grand ballroom at the plaza continued spinning, 200 guests laughing, toasting, dancing to the soft jazz quartet, while I sat frozen in that moment. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms on marble walls. Waiters glided between tables with silver trays of caviar and Dom Perignon. It was the perfect wedding. And it was the worst day of my life. "Face it, you pathetic old witch," she whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell champagne on her breath. "You lost. I won. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it." But here's what Sophia didn't know. What she couldn't have known as she savored her moment of triumph. For 6 months, I'd been carrying a secret so devastating it had stolen my sleep, my appetite, and nearly my sanity. A secret that was about to destroy her life completely. You see, while she thought she was celebrating her final conquest, she was actually about to discover she'd underestimated the wrong woman entirely. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Saturday in March. I know the exact time because I'd been checking my Cartier watch, the one Robert gave me for our 20th anniversary, calculating how much longer I needed to keep that forced smile on my face. The orchestra was playing At Last by Etta James, the same song Robert and I had danced to at our wedding 35 years ago. Sophia had chosen it deliberately. I was seated at the head table, wearing the dress my husband always said made me look like royalty. I'd chosen this outfit purposefully. I wanted Robert with me somehow for this moment, because today wasn't just my son's wedding day. Today was the day of my revenge. David was on the dance floor with his cousin Emma, spinning her like he used to do as a child. My son looked radiant, genuinely happy, with no idea that his new wife had just confessed to murdering his father. Yes, you heard that right. Murdered. My sister Patricia was chatting with the minister. My brother James was playing with his grandchildren. My best friend Linda was taking selfies with other guests, all of them oblivious to the drama about to explode. Sophia had spent the last 20 minutes drinking champagne like water, not drunk enough to stumble, but enough that her carefully constructed mask was slipping. I knew the signs. I'd studied every micro-expression of hers for months. She thought she was celebrating her final victory. She was actually about to discover that she'd been playing checkers while I was playing chess. "Margaret," she said, settling into the chair beside me with calculated grace. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard every word, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my voice calm as a lake before a storm. She tilted her head, studying my face like a predator evaluating prey. Around us, the celebration continued. Crystal glasses clinking, bursts of laughter, silk gowns rustling as women moved between tables. Then you understand what needs to happen now? For 6 months, I'd played the role of the confused, vulnerable mother-in-law. I'd pretended to forget names, lose keys, mix up dates. I'd let Sophia believe she was winning, that she was successfully manipulating me. It had been the performance of my lifetime. And now it was time for the grand finale. "I understand perfectly," I said, reaching for my Hermes bag, the same bag I'd been carrying to every family gathering for months. The bag, Sophia probably assumed, contained lipstick and tissues. Instead, it contained the weapons that would destroy her life. "Actually, Sophia," I continued, opening the bag slowly, "there are a few things you need to know before you celebrate." She frowned, a tiny wrinkle appearing between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. For the first time in 6 months, I smiled for real. "I'm talking about the fact that you just confessed murder to the wrong person." The color started draining from her face. I'm talking about the fact that every word you said in the last 20 minutes was recorded. Her hands began to tremble. And I'm talking about the fact that the company you think you just inherited, I own 90% of it. Sophia went white as her wedding dress. But before we get to that, I said, pulling out a manila folder, let me tell you how I discovered that my daughter-in-law killed my husband, and how my own son decided to help her destroy me. 6 months ago, on a Tuesday that started like any other, my world collapsed completely. It was September 15th. I was in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Harrison building, the skyscraper I'd purchased with profits from expanding my consulting firm to Chicago and Miami. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view showed all of Manhattan stretching to the horizon. 30 years ago, when I started the company at our kitchen table in Brooklyn Heights, I used to dream of an office like this. My assistant, Sarah, knocked and entered with my morning routine: black coffee, no sugar, and contracts needing my signature. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison," she said, setting everything on my mahogany desk. "The Boston Investors meeting is confirmed for Thursday." "Thank you, Sarah. Anything else?" She hesitated, biting her lower lip, a habit when nervous. "Actually, there's a Detective Rodriguez here to see you. He says it's about Mr. Roberts' case." The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. Robert had been dead for 3 years, hit and run on a rainy Thursday night. The driver was never found. The case had gone cold. At least, that's what I thought. "Send him in," I said, straightening my blazer. Detective Rodriguez was exactly as I remembered, a compact man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He'd been the lead investigator on Robert's case. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this must be difficult." He opened a manila folder and pulled out a photograph. 3 days ago, we arrested a woman for DUI, 3rd offense, so she's facing serious jail time. During processing, she started talking, said she had information about an old hit-and-run case. He slid the photograph across my desk. It was a driver's license photo. A young blonde with blue eyes, perfect smile, and cheekbones that could cut glass. The name on the license read, Sophia Catherine Mills. My blood turned to ice. I knew that face. It was the face that had been sitting at my dinner table every Sunday for 2 years. The face my son kissed goodnight every evening. It was my son's fiancée. "Do you recognize her?" Detective Rodriguez asked, watching my reaction. Yes, I managed. She's engaged to my son." The detective nodded slowly. "She claims she was the driver who hit your husband's car 3 years ago. Says she was drunk, panicked, and fled the scene." The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor. My mind was connecting dots I'd never thought to connect. Sophia had appeared in David's life just 6 months after Robert's death. At the time, it seemed like a happy coincidence. She'd been so attentive from the beginning, so interested in our family, our history, our business. Now I understood why. "There's more," the detective said. "During questioning, she specifically mentioned your son, David Harrison. Said they're engaged and that she knows details about the family that only someone very close would know." "What kind of details?" "Details about your business, about your financial situation." He looked directly into my eyes. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to ask, does your son know about her involvement in your husband's death?" And that's when my world completely fell apart. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The strange questions David had been asking about the business. His sudden insistence that I should consider retiring. The small things disappearing from my memory that he seemed so concerned about documenting. I don't know," I lied, because the truth was too terrible to say out loud. But deep in my heart, I knew. God help me. I knew. At 4 o'clock, I called David. "Hey, Mom!" His voice was cheerful, carefree. "How's your day going?" "David, can you come to the office? I need to talk to you about something." "Sure. Everything okay? You sound strange." "Everything's fine. Just, please come." He arrived 40 minutes later, wearing the navy suit I'd given him for his birthday. When he smiled walking into my office, for a moment I almost forgot why he was there. "What's up, Mom?" I showed him the photograph. He went pale, then red, then pale again. "Mom, I can explain." "So you knew." It wasn't a question. David collapsed into the chair, running his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when nervous. "Mom, please, let me explain. It's not what you're thinking. It's not what I'm thinking. My son is engaged to the woman who killed his father, and it's not what I'm thinking. She didn't mean to. It was an accident. She was going through a difficult time. She'd had too much to drink, and she fled the scene. Left your father to die alone in the rain." David flinched as if I'd struck him. "She told me everything, Mom. She was destroyed by guilt. That's why she sought me out. She wanted to try to make amends somehow." "Make amends? She killed your father, and you think she can make amends by marrying you?" "Mom, I love her, and she loves me. What happened was terrible, but it was an accident. She's a killer, David." "No, she's the woman I love, and if you can't accept that, then maybe it's time you stop trying to control my life." Those words hit me like a physical blow. "David." "No, Mom, enough. Sophia was right. You'll never accept our happiness." "Sophia was right about what?" He hesitated, realizing he'd said too much. "About what, David?" About you being possessive, controlling, about how you can't accept that I've grown up." But there was something more. Something in the way he avoided my eyes. "What else did she say, David?" "Nothing. Forget it." "What else?" He sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 32 years. "She said that you're showing signs of problems, memory issues, confusion. She thinks you should see a doctor." And that's when I understood. It wasn't just about the accident. It wasn't just about Sophia killing Robert. They were planning something more. Something that would destroy me completely. In the days that followed, I became a different woman. On the outside, I remained Margaret Harrison, the successful businesswoman. On the inside, I was dying, but I was also investigating. The following Thursday, I called an old friend from college. Carlos Mendoza had become one of New York's most respected private investigators. We met at a discreet cafe in the village. Carlos had aged well, silver at his temples, but still with the same sharp intelligence I remembered. "Margaret," he said, "you look tense." "I am," I admitted. "Carlos, I need your help, and I need this to stay absolutely confidential." I told him everything, about Sophia, about the accident, about my growing suspicions. Carlos listened in silence, making occasional notes. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret, you understand that if your suspicions are correct, we're talking about premeditated manipulation, possibly fraud, maybe even conspiracy." "What do you mean?" "You said Sophia has shown a lot of interest in your business." "Yes. Always asking questions about succession, about how the company is structured, about my retirement plans. And David has been acting strangely regarding the business?" I thought about recent conversations with my son, how he'd started questioning my decisions, how he'd suggested I should delegate more responsibilities. "Yes," I said quietly. Carlos nodded. "I'm going to investigate Sophia Catherine Mills from top to bottom. Financial history, previous relationships, everything." "How long do you need?" "Give me 2 weeks. And Margaret, while I'm doing this, you need to act normally. You can't give any sign that you suspect anything." But acting normally proved harder than I'd imagined. The following Sunday, Sophia and David came for dinner as always. I sat at the head of the dining table, watching my future daughter-in-law delicately cut the salmon my housekeeper had prepared. "Margaret," Sophia said, smiling sweetly, "David told me you've been a little stressed lately. Too much work?" There was something in the way she said it, a false concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Just the usual business challenges," I replied carefully. "You know, you should really think about taking a vacation. Maybe a trip to Europe?" David nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great idea, Mom. You deserve a break." "Actually," Sophia continued, "David and I were talking about this. Maybe it's time you considered, well, not exactly retiring, but perhaps passing more responsibilities to the next generation? There it was. The first real move. What do you mean? Well, Sophia said, as if the idea had just occurred to her, David knows the business better than anyone. He grew up with the company. This was true. David had spent every summer working in different departments. I'd always planned for him to be my successor, but not like this, not through manipulation and lies. It's something to think about, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Sophia smiled, and for a moment, I saw a flash of triumph in her eyes. After they left, I sat in the living room, looking at family photos. Robert and me at our wedding, David as a baby, family vacations, a lifetime of memories that Sophia was trying to steal. On Wednesday, I discovered something disturbing. I was reviewing the building's access logs when I noticed something odd. David had been in the office the previous Sunday, at 2:30 p.m. This was strange because David never worked on Sundays, and he hadn't mentioned going to the office. I called security. Was your son accompanied? I asked. Yes, Mrs. Harrison. He was with a young blonde woman. Said she was his fiancée and that you'd asked them to pick up some documents. My blood ran cold. I hadn't asked for anything. Did they go to my office? Yes, ma'am. They were there for about an hour. An hour. In my office. Without my permission or knowledge. What were they looking for? On Thursday, Carlos called. Margaret, we need to talk. In person. Today. His voice was tense, urgent. We met at the same cafe. This time, Carlos looked disturbed. What did you find? I asked. He opened a thick folder and began spreading documents across the table. Sophia Catherine Mills doesn't exist, he said without preamble. What do you mean she doesn't exist? Well, she exists, but not the way you think. The name is real, the documents are real, but the story she told is completely fabricated. He showed me a birth certificate. She didn't graduate from Rutgers. In fact, she barely finished high school. Another document. She has a criminal history. Small-time cons, mostly. Credit card fraud, document forgery, a clear pattern of dishonest behavior. More papers. And here's the interesting part. In the last 5 years, she's had relationships with 3 different men. All wealthy, all older, and all ended with her receiving substantial amounts of money. My head was spinning. You're saying she's a professional con artist? Yes. And Margaret, there's more. He showed me a series of photographs. These were taken 3 months before she met David. Sophia was investigating you, your family, your business. She spent weeks studying your routine, your habits, your vulnerabilities. The photos showed Sophia at various locations around the city, near my office building, at the restaurant where I regularly had lunch. She'd hunted me like a predator hunts its prey. But why? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you're wealthy, powerful, and have an unmarried son. You were the perfect target. Carlos leaned forward. Margaret, the accident that killed your husband? It wasn't an accident. The world stopped spinning. What? I found evidence that Sophia was following Robert that night. There are security camera records showing her car behind his for several blocks before the crash. I couldn't breathe. She killed him on purpose? I can't prove that yet. But I can prove it wasn't the chance encounter she claimed. She was following him. And Margaret. There's something you need to know about David. What? He knows. About everything. About her criminal history. About the other relationships. About the investigation she did on your family. The coffee in my mouth turned to ash. How do you know? Because I found emails between them. Dozens of them. Discussing how to handle the Margaret problem. How to make you seem incompetent. How to document your supposed episodes of mental confusion. He handed me a folder with email printouts. They're planning to have you declared mentally incompetent, Margaret. They've already consulted lawyers. They already have a doctor willing to testify that you're suffering from early-onset dementia. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. My own son is planning to rob you, along with her. I sat there reading email after email, watching my son conspire to destroy me. "Margaret," Carlos said gently, "there's one more thing. The company. They think David will inherit everything when you're declared incompetent. But you told me the legal structure is more complex than that, right?" I nodded, unable to speak. "So they're planning a theft based on a false premise?" "Yes," I managed to whisper. "David has 10%. I have 90. Carlos smiled for the first time since we'd started talking. "Then, Margaret, I think it's time you started planning your own strategy." The 3 months that followed were the most difficult and most strategic of my life. I had to become an actress, not just pretend I didn't know anything, but actively participate in my own planned destruction. And I discovered I was very good at it. I started small. The Monday after my conversation with Carlos, I forgot where I'd put my car keys. I searched for them for 15 minutes, letting David see every moment of my confusion. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked with concern that seemed genuine. "Of course I am," I replied, sounding slightly irritated. "I just can't remember where I put these damn keys." He found them in the refrigerator, where I'd placed them deliberately. "Mom, do you remember putting them here?" I pretended to think, then shook my head with a confused expression. "No, I don't remember." "How strange." I saw him make a mental note, probably literal. I discovered later he was keeping a detailed diary of my episodes. The following week, I escalated the performance. I canceled an important meeting and pretended not to remember scheduling it. I called my assistant by the wrong name. I asked about a project that had been completed months earlier. Each mistake was carefully calculated. Each moment of confusion was planned to seem genuine without being so dramatic it would raise suspicions. And it worked. David started coming to the office more frequently. Sophia began making suggestions about how I could simplify my routine. Both started talking about the importance of me getting more rest. But while they thought they were manipulating me, I was gathering evidence. I installed discreet security cameras in my office and at home. I began recording all important conversations. I documented every lie, every manipulation, every moment they thought they were deceiving me. In the 3rd week of October, I found Sophia in my office on a Friday afternoon. She said she was just stopping by, but I saw her photographing documents on my desk with her phone. "Sophia," I said, entering the room as if I'd just arrived. "What a pleasant surprise." She quickly put away her phone, smiling with that false sweetness I'd learned to hate. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind. David said you weren't feeling well today, so I thought I'd stop by." I hadn't told David I wasn't feeling well because I was feeling perfectly fine. "How thoughtful of you," I said, "but I'm fine, just a little tired." "Of course, you've been working so hard." She moved closer, placing a hand on my arm with false concern. "Margaret, can I say something? As someone who cares about you?" "Of course, dear. I know this might be hard to accept, but have you noticed you've been forgetting things more lately? David is very worried." Here it was, the direct play. Forgetting things? Small things. Names, appointments, where you put objects. It's perfectly normal at our age. Our age. She was 28. I was 58. Do you think I should be concerned? Not concerned exactly, but maybe it would be good to talk to a doctor, just to make sure everything's okay. A doctor? David knows an excellent neurologist, Dr. Henry Morrison. He specializes in age-related issues. Dr. Henry Morrison. Carlos had mentioned that name. The doctor they'd already consulted about my supposed mental decline. "Maybe that's a good idea," I said, pretending to consider the suggestion. Sophia smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of triumph in her eyes. "Great. I'll have David schedule an appointment." After she left, I called Carlos. "I need information on Dr. Henry Morrison," I said. "Already investigating him," Carlos replied. "And Margaret?" "You need to know they've accelerated the timeline. They're planning to move everything after the wedding. They want you declared incompetent before the end of the year." My heart raced. "That's in 2 months." "Yes. And there's more. They've already started transferring small amounts. Nothing you'd notice immediately, but they're testing the system. I felt cold rage spreading through my chest. They weren't just planning to rob me, they'd already started. Carlos, I need you to help me prepare a surprise for them. What kind of surprise? I smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd had in months. The kind that will destroy them completely. In the weeks that followed, I intensified my performance while secretly strengthening my legal defenses. I worked with my lawyers to create an even more complex asset protection structure. I documented every manipulation attempt, and I began planning the perfect moment to reveal everything. The wedding would be ideal, public, witnesses, a moment when they'd feel most secure, a moment when the fall would be most devastating. The wedding day arrived like a storm you see approaching but can't avoid. I woke at 5 a.m. without an alarm. My body knew this was the day. Today, I would wear the navy dress Robert always said made my eyes shine like sapphires. Today, I would carry the folder containing enough evidence to completely destroy the life of the woman who'd killed him. Today, I would discover if I still had a son or if I'd lost him forever. The ceremony was at the plaza, in the ballroom I'd reserved and paid for a year earlier. 200 guests, white and gold flowers, classical music played by a string quartet. Everything was perfect, and it was the saddest day of my life. I sat in the front row, smiling and waving to guests. My sister Patricia was beside me, beautiful in her pink dress, with no idea of the drama about to unfold. David stood at the altar, handsome in his black tuxedo. When he saw me, he smiled and waved, and my heart broke a little more. Then the music changed, and Sophia appeared. She was stunning. The wedding dress had cost $50,000. Italian silk, hand-embroidered, with a 3-meter train that flowed behind her like water. She walked down the aisle with the grace of a queen, looking like the perfect bride. And I knew she was a killer. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows that sounded hollow, promises that were lies, rings exchanged between two people building their future on my husband's grave. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," I felt bile rise in my throat. But I smiled. I applauded. I acted like the happy mother-in-law everyone expected me to be. The reception began at 7 p.m. The same ballroom, now transformed with round tables, crystal chandeliers, and a jazz band. Waiters circulated with Dom Perignon and caviar canapés. I sat at the head table, watching the newlyweds dance their first dance. At Last, by Etta James, the same song Robert and I had danced to at our wedding. Sophia had chosen it deliberately. For the first 2 hours, I maintained my composure. I smiled for photos. I gave the traditional mother of the groom speech. I danced with David when he asked me. He knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the tension of his shoulders. But Sophia was radiant, confident, triumphant. She thought she'd won. At 9:30, she started drinking more seriously. At 9:40, David went to dance with his cousin Emma, leaving Sophia alone at the head table. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Sophia," I said, leaning toward her, "are you enjoying yourself?" "Of course, Margaret. It's the happiest day of my life." "I'm sure it is. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." "About what?" "About the future. About changes." Her eyes lit up. It was exactly the opening she'd been waiting for. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've been thinking about what you and David said. About me, perhaps, stepping back, letting you two take on more responsibilities." Sophia leaned forward like a shark sensing blood. "Margaret, that's wonderful. I know it must be a difficult decision, but I think it's the right thing to do." "Yes, well, the appointment with Dr. Morrison was enlightening." This was a lie. I'd canceled the appointment and told David that the doctor had confirmed his worst suspicions about my mental state. And what did he say? That I'm in the early stages of cognitive decline, that it will get worse over time. Sophia tried to look sad, but couldn't completely hide her satisfaction. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry, but at least now we know what's happening." "What kind of plans?" "Well, first, you need proper care." David and I have already researched some excellent facilities. Places where you can receive the best possible treatment. Facilities. She couldn't even say the word nursing home. And what about the business? Don't worry about that. David can handle everything. But what if I don't want to? What if I'm not ready to give up everything? Sophia's smile grew colder. Margaret, dear, you don't have a choice. The doctor was very clear about your condition. You're no longer competent to make these kinds of decisions. She looked around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned even closer. Look, I'll be direct with you. David has already consulted lawyers. We already have the papers prepared. You're going to be declared mentally incompetent, and David will assume legal guardianship. And if I fight it? Sophia laughed, a low, cruel sound. On what grounds? You have an official medical diagnosis. We have months of documentation of your episodes. We have witnesses who can testify about your erratic behavior. She paused, savoring the moment. Besides, do you really want this to become a public spectacle? Do you want everyone to know about your condition? So, I have no choice? You have a choice. You can accept this with dignity, or you can make things difficult for everyone. But the outcome will be the same. She took a sip of champagne, her eyes never leaving my face. Actually, Margaret, there's something you should know. Something that will help you understand why this is inevitable. My heart started beating faster. What? Sophia looked around once more, then leaned so close I could feel her breath on my ear. The accident that killed your husband? It wasn't an accident. The world stopped. I followed him that night, deliberately. I waited for the right moment, and then I hit his car. I couldn't breathe. Why? I managed to whisper. Because he was in my way. Because I needed you to be vulnerable. Alone. Dependent on your son. She smiled, and it was the cruelest smile I'd ever seen. It took me 3 years to execute my plan, Margaret. 3 years studying you, your family, your business. 3 years getting close to David, making him fall in love with me. David knows. Of course he knows. I told him everything months ago. And you know what he said? He said you deserved to suffer. That you'd always been too controlling. That it was time you learned your place. Tears started streaming down my face. My own son. Your own son chose me. Chose our future. Chose the money. Sophia leaned back in her chair. And now, Margaret, you're going to sign the papers that transfer everything to us. You're going to enter that facility we've chosen for you. And you're going to disappear from our lives. And if I don't, then I'll tell everyone at this party about your mental condition. I'll make a scene you'll never recover from. I'll destroy your reputation so completely that no one will ever believe a word you say again. She paused, letting the threat sink in. Besides, who's going to believe you? A confused old woman with dementia, making crazy accusations against the daughter-in-law who just wants to take care of her. That's when she did it. That's when she leaned forward, gathered saliva in her mouth, and spit directly in my face. Face it, you pathetic old witch, she whispered. You lost. I won. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. For a moment, I was paralyzed, humiliated, destroyed. And then I smiled. Sophia, I said calmly, wiping the spit from my face with my napkin. Before you celebrate your victory, there are a few things you need to know. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila folder. First, I said, opening the folder and removing the first document, you're wrong about who owns the company. I placed the holding company deed in front of her. David has 10%. I have 90%. I watched the color drain from her face. Second, I continued, pulling out another document. Those 10% David has come with very specific conditions, including a morality clause that can revoke his stake if he acts against the family's interests. I took out the third document. Third, Dr. Morrison never examined me. In fact, he's being investigated for falsifying medical reports in exchange for money. Sophia was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. Fourth, I said, pulling the small recorder from my purse. I recorded every word you just said, including your confession to murdering my husband. She tried to grab the recorder, but I was faster. "And fifth," I said, waving discreetly to two men in suits standing near the ballroom entrance. "The detectives waiting over there have an arrest warrant with your name on it." That's when David appeared, running toward our table with a look of panic. "Mom? What's happening? Why are there police here?" I looked at my son, my baby, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, and felt my heart break for the last time. "David," I said softly, "sit down. There are some things you need to know about your wife, and about the choices you've made." What happened in the next 15 minutes was simultaneously the most satisfying and most devastating thing I'd ever experienced. Sophia tried to deny everything, of course, said I was delusional, that it was all part of my mental condition. But when the detectives played the recording of her confession, when they showed the evidence Carlos had gathered, when they presented the photographs of her following Robert the night of the accident, she collapsed. Completely. "I didn't mean to kill him," she screamed as the detectives handcuffed her. "I just needed him out of the way. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." The guests were in shock. 200 people who'd come to celebrate a wedding were now watching the bride get arrested for murder. My sister Patricia was crying. My brother-in-law was trying to calm the children who didn't understand what was happening. David's friends were staring at him with a mixture of horror and pity. And David? David was sitting in the chair beside me, staring at his hands, in complete shock. "Mom," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know she'd confessed to you. I didn't know you knew, but you knew about the accident." "Yes. You knew she killed your father." "Yes. And you chose to stay with her anyway." He didn't respond. "David," I said, my voice firmer now, "look at me." He raised his eyes, and I saw tears streaming down his face. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do this to me? Why did you conspire to rob me, to institutionalize me, to destroy me?" She said you'd never accept our relationship if you knew the truth. She said you'd try to separate us. So you decided to separate me from my own life? It wasn't supposed to be like this. She said you'd be better cared for in a facility. She said you'd be happier without the pressures of business. And you believed her? David closed his eyes. I wanted to believe her. Because I loved her. And because part of me always resented how you controlled everything. This confession hit me like a punch to the stomach. David, I was preparing you to take over the company. Gradually, responsibly, but always on your terms. Always your way. Because it was my company. Because I built it from nothing. And I was never going to be anything more than Margaret Harrison's son. Now I understood. It wasn't just about Sophia. It was about years of accumulated resentment. Years of feeling diminished, controlled, underestimated. But that didn't justify what he'd done. "David," I said, "you conspired to have me declared mentally incompetent. You documented false episodes. You planned to institutionalize me against my will. I know. And I'm sorry." "You're sorry?" "Mom, please. I know I messed up everything. I know there's no excuse for what I did. But she manipulated me. She made me believe it was the only way." "The only way to what? To rob me?" "The only way for us to be happy." I looked at my son, this 32-year-old man I'd raised, educated, loved unconditionally, and realized I didn't know him anymore. Maybe I never had. "David," I said, "you have a choice now. One last choice." "What choice?" "You can stand by me. You can testify against Sophia. You can help me ensure she pays for what she did to your father." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Or you can continue defending the woman who murdered Robert. You can continue choosing her over family." David was quiet for a long moment, looking toward where Sophia was being led away by police. She was screaming, begging him to do something, promising they could still be together. "Mom," he said finally, "what's going to happen to me? That depends on you. And if I testify against her, if I help, then maybe with a lot of time and a lot of work, we can find a way to rebuild our relationship. And if I don't," I looked at him with all the coldness I could muster, "then you'll discover that the 10% of the company you thought you had never really existed. You'll discover that the house you live in, the car you drive, The bank account you use, all of it is in my name. And you'll discover what it really means to be alone in the world." David went pale. "You'd disown me?" "David, you conspired to rob me. You planned to institutionalize me against my will. You chose your father's killer over your own mother." My voice was steady, emotionless. "You already disowned yourself." He sat there for several more minutes, processing everything. Around us, the guests were being discreetly escorted out by hotel security. The party was over. The wedding was over. Everything was over. "Mom," David said finally, "I'll testify against her." "Why?" "Because she killed my father. And because I finally understand that she never loved me. She just used me. It was a start. Not forgiveness. That would take a long time if it ever happened. But it was a start." "David," I said, "you're going to need to find a place to live. You're going to need to find a job. You're going to need to learn to live with the consequences of your choices. I understand. And if you want, in a few years, when the wounds aren't so fresh, maybe we can talk about possibilities." He nodded, tears still streaming down his face. "I love you, Mom. I know it doesn't seem like it, after everything I did, but I do." "I know," I said, "and that's why this hurts so much." 2 years later, I'm sitting in Woodlawn Cemetery, placing white roses, Robert's favorites, on the grave I visit every month. The morning sun filters through old trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the polished marble. Robert Harrison, beloved husband, devoted father, 1960-2021. Simple, elegant, like he would have wanted. "Hi, my love," I whisper, kneeling to arrange the flowers. "I came to tell you the news." Sophia was sentenced to 15 years for vehicular manslaughter. She could have gotten more, but she made a deal, confessed everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. She's serving time at Bedford Hills, and from what I hear, she's not adapting well to prison life. I don't feel sorry for her. David is trying to rebuild his life. He got a job at a smaller consulting firm. I didn't use my influence to help or hurt. He's living in a small apartment in Queens, driving a used car, learning to live on a budget. We talk once a month. Careful conversations, full of things unsaid. He's in therapy, trying to understand how he got to the point of conspiring against his own mother. I'm in therapy too, trying to understand how to forgive the son who betrayed me. It's a slow process. Painful, but it's a process. The company is thriving. Without the distraction of trying to protect an ungrateful son and a manipulative daughter-in-law, I've been able to focus completely on business. We've opened offices in Boston and Atlanta. Our revenue increased 40% last year. I hired a new vice president, a brilliant 45-year-old woman who reminds me of myself when I was younger. Ambitious, intelligent, honest. Maybe she'll be my successor someday. Maybe not. But at least I know the company will be in good hands when I decide to retire for real. "You know what's funny, Robert," I say, running my hand over the cold marble. "During all those months, when I was planning my revenge, I thought I'd feel better when it was over. I thought justice would heal the pain. A gentle breeze stirs the trees, and for a moment I can almost feel him beside me. But it didn't heal it. The pain is still here. The betrayal still hurts. The loss is still real." I pause, watching a butterfly land on one of the roses. "But you know what I learned? I learned that justice isn't about feeling better. It's about doing the right thing, even when it hurts. It's about protecting other people from going through what we went through." The butterfly flies away, and I stand up, brushing dirt from my knees. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing not to let anger consume me. I look at Robert's photo on the headstone, that smile I loved so much, those kind eyes that always made me feel safe, and I learned that true love sometimes means letting go. Even when it hurts, even when you want to hold on with all your strength. I pick up my purse, a new one, without secret compartments for recorders or folders with incriminating evidence, and prepare to leave. "David called yesterday," I say. "He wants to know if he can visit on Father's Day. I don't know if I'm ready yet, but maybe. Maybe it's time to start trying." I take one last look at the grave. "Rest in peace, my love." Justice was served, and I'm learning to live again. I walk back to my car, feeling the warm sun on my face. I have a meeting at 10, lunch with my sister at noon, and a therapy appointment at 3. A new life. Different from what I'd planned, but mine nonetheless. And for the first time in 3 years, that's enough.